Hello and welcome to the podcast, The David Black Show on the 9's. This is David Black. I'm the founder of the YouTube channel, Reformed Apologist. We're here to talk about life. This is a crossfire type of a reality show. It's a Spitfire Grill talk on captivating topics. The subject for today, entitled, What Happened to Dan? Dan won't call back. He's my old pal from my hometown in Wisconsin that played in my rock band with me. He was the lead singer. I wrote songs with Dan, hung out with him, went to class with him, public school. Pretty much from first grade up to 12th. Graduated with him, hung out with him my early college years. Now, every time I try to reach Dan, I never receive any return communications these days. For those of you who don't know, this guy Dan, who was my friend, and speaking to those who probably don't know me personally, so don't know the story, Dan is and was a creatively brilliant person. He's just not involved in a professional career in the arts or music currently. His songwriting has to be really respected, though. Some of his work even indicated foreknowledge of future events in my life, even in particular. I don't know really how he knew those things in advance. You might wonder why I ask about Dan in particular. It seems like everything went so extraordinarily badly in life. I'm speaking from a personal level. I've experienced such a great amount of extraordinary loss at a personal level, enduring and through the whole thing. Dan was mostly completely silent and seems to want to be silent to the bitter end. So it's what, man? Was my life taken over by Dan? Is that what happened? Or is Dan like a Trappist monk performing strict observances in his Catholic way? Or is he just a man of very austere habits? Okay, so Dan wasn't perfectly silent. My memoir, A Dragon Comes As Well, documents one phone conversation in 2013 with Dan. But that seems like it's because I was able to get him on the phone and catch him right before a dinner party. I might have talked with him in one other instance on the phone, and that was in 2012. Anyway, is Dan's Catholic doctrinal worldview merely in the way of us communicating? How come? On what point of distinction? I'm not an overly obsessed person when it comes to Dan. I don't have that type of problem. I tend to be quite unassuming and proper in most of my ways and dealings. However, when brainstorming ideas for this show and its episodes, I had to find a way to get right down to the point of things. Bringing up Dan goes into problems that are prevalent and that many identify with. It's a practical application or concrete example of the more abstract concepts being talked about. I hope that in some future episodes of the David Black Show on the 9's that I could actually get Dan on the connection line to be on my podcast and converse with him. What has been his problem this whole time? How can I get Dan on the show so that we can talk? Overall, this matter has to be dealt with. It is too touching upon my own life and others' lives, consequently. Also, was Dan a trendsetter for other people in his persisting and highly reluctant and cold behavior to old acquaintances? That would not be good, as it would not be of God to act that way. Did Dan from his childhood bed envision and dream he and I robbing a bank, and then premeditate that we would one day rob a bank? And I'm not admitting to robbing some stupid bank. I'm just saying this could all be in Dan's imagination from his childhood, that he premeditated that after a certain point we would never talk again, or that we would never talk again, then become bank robbers. Maybe he wanted to have us not talk long, to chide me into taking up a life of crime, and to, finally take a gun over and rob a bank. And this all being for Dan's personal entertainment. Thinks it's funny he could shape and mold me into a bank robber. Obviously, I wouldn't do that. So I tried to call Dan already to get him on this episode, and this is how it sounded. I thought it was interesting to listen to how he causes me to talk. So I'm going to play the segment here of the greeting followed by my message for Dan.
You've reached the cell phone voicemail of James at Wells Fargo Asset Management. I'm sorry I'm not available to take your call right now, but if you leave me a message, I'll return it as soon as I can. If your call requires immediate assistance, please call our institutional sales desk at 888-253-6. And one of my colleagues will be happy to assist you. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
At the tone, please record your message. When you have finished recording, you may hang up or press 1 for more options.
Hey there, Dan. This is David. David Black, formerly David Zoskamper, your old buddy. Dan, okay, I was asking my mom to ask you for, and that's what's stupid to do. I could just go directly to you on my cell phone, you know. I'm starting this podcast, but I haven't really started it yet. But I'm probably starting it. Okay, so if you could, I don't know if you will, but record yourself saying something. You could direct it at me, or if you want to, or whatever. But record yourself and then give it to me. Okay, like email it or give it to my mom to give it to me. I don't really care what you say. I could put it in the podcast and respond to it. But the thing is, like, the idea behind it is like you'd be good at like breaking my binds or something, getting me to talk about stuff I wouldn't talk about, or try to see my blind spot and talk about something that I wouldn't have talked about. That'd be fun. Or whatever, you know, it's kind of like a goofy investigative journalist podcast, and or, you know, no, like, do that. That'd be good. By the way, the guys here and I are going to record those. But anyway, like, if you actually send me an audio file, work with it, you know, I'll take you serious. But if you want to be joking and say, like, gobbledygook, that's true. That's possible. I would accept gobbledygook. Yeah, like, just whatever. Just say whatever, you know, doesn't matter to me. So you have my email address. You could send like a WAV file or whatever. I can probably accept most like file formats. But I'm not going to use like some Reformed brethren who's all like brotherly love and tight knit with me.
Just to interject here, I did not want to at first involve Reformed brethren, and that's why I was calling on Dan. However, this message was created while I was still working on the show's overall concept, which had not been completely refined yet at that moment. Now that some time has passed, I've gone against what I originally said there, went ahead and included said brethren in the show. But it's my show after all. I may do so. So continuing now with the same audio clip.
It'd be easier to like talk with you on the podcast. We're not like all tight knit and stuff. We're not all like going to the same church type or something where we're all like, you probably get it. You probably get it even better. So try if you would. If you don't, you know, have a nice day. I don't mind either way. It's fine. All right. Take care.
Yeah, I'm trying to pass that off as okay when it's probably not okay by far. Also, probably not real smart of me to try to go through Mom at first. Just so you all know, I'm not going to have real experts on the show, for this first installment at least. What I do have planned is several sound clips of my conversations with people. These were recorded on the phone and in person, and both ways with their permission. When I thought about it, I realized most shows have this sort of circular reasoning of credibility involved. The persons in it only have credibility for the ties of the show. I'm always talking with my buddy Johnny about biblical doctrine and theology, and Johnny had much to say recently about Reformed doctrine. We're both Reformed Christians in our worldviews and Calvinists. Johnny is just a guy. I apologize here for the lack of a greeting and intro in each of these clips. Please be patient with me, this being the first episode. And here's the first of these sound clips with Johnny, him talking about Reformation doctrine, responding to my questions and prompts.
That I've run into before with James and Tom, which is that they confuse with me what we're talking about when we say the Reformers or Reformed theology. It's a confusion of Reformed theology versus the actual Reformers, and there being the Reformer in the modern sense, where one wouldn't put up with the harmful industry and wants reform done in that industry. And maybe that's confusion coming from me, somewhat, my channel, like what did I mean by reformed, this or that, you know.
Reformed theology, and I've had this conversation with you before. Many people make the mistake of thinking that Reformed theology is simply believing in the 5 tenets of Calvinism. That is not correct. Reformed theology is a hermeneutic. Mm-hmm. It's about having a high view of Scripture, saying that the Scriptures are felonious, is inspired, because a person can, I mean, what I think, I mean, I'm not saying that these people exist, but it's not impossible. A person can hold to the 5 points of Calvinism and not believe in biblical inerrancy, and not believe in sola scriptura, and have a low view of Scripture and say that the Scriptures are, have errors, or that, that was his opinion and stuff like that. It is hypothetically possible to hold to all 5 points. It's unlikely, but it is hypothetically possible to hold to the 5 points and not hold a high view of Scripture. But the point is that Reformed theology is about holding a high view of Scripture. So if you have a low view of Scripture, you're not Reformed. And one of the things that happened during the Protestant Reformation, especially with the uncovery of so much, the original languages, ad fontes, and the to the first, it was the desire to get back to the apostolic doctrine, and that's where the hermeneutic of the historical grammatical method, understanding, what the word justification meant, what the word metanoia meant, repent. These observations allowed the reformers to uncover and take away so much of the fog of the pagan traditions that had been incorporated into Christianity for over 1,000 years. Mm-hmm. And so Reformed theology is about a hermeneutic. But what you have people that take the conclusions of the Reformed theology, such as, sola justification by faith alone, such as Calvinism, but they abandon the hermeneutic that got them there. Uh-huh. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I'm just wondering, by the same hermeneutic and in the same position, Reformed theology or the Reformed position, to what extent, do we then follow the best examples of reformers? Arnold, you should talk about Jesus Christ being a great reformer. Obviously, the reformers themselves are reformers. That's redundant. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But Martin Luther is a great reformer. So how are we to follow even in their footsteps? And quite obviously, if these people were alive today, would they put up with harmful industries or systems that are quite obviously harming the sheep or doing something evil to people under different guises? It's but to say that you must do that or must be calling out evil, that's a biblical question too. It just is simply a biblical question in the first place. Do you have to call out evil? I've written on the topic myself. I don't know if you can speak to that at all. An example of reformers.
So the thing is, it's hard to when any historian will tell you, it's very difficult to talk about what a person in the past would have done today, because they when you're talking about someone like a Luther, you had a state church, and of course, me as a Baptist, Luther wouldn't even allowed me to be in his church. Calvin would have banned me from Geneva because I'm a Baptist. So we're talking about a time when they believed in sacralism, that the churches are state churches and that they could impose they could impose civil laws that were based on religious beliefs. That's why Michael Servetus of Miguel Cervito was burned at the stake as a heretic, because that was civil law back then. So today we live in a very secularized society. Secular meaning anything but organized religion, and that this is something that the reformers never dreamed of. They didn't experience living in a world where people are saying, well, we all came from hominids, and that the Bible is just a book of myths, and we believe in secular humanism. This is not the world that they lived in, and so we can only comment on what their view is of Scripture. And their view of Scripture was that it was a high view, and that we were supposed to interpret it within its original context. And we know that they had their disagreements among themselves. Luther, Zwingli and Calvin had high respect for Luther. They saw his flaws, but they had great respect for what Luther did and what God did through Luther, because Luther hated them both.
Touching slightly on the topic of Catholic versus Reformed doctrine is the topic of Thomas Aquinas. And Johnny had some select remarks to give from memory about the late pastor and radio personality Robert Morey. Inspiring this was the anecdote that Morey had called Michael Heiser a neo-Mormon polytheist in an email to me, and my tending to forget this jab, almost on purpose in my own mind. And so he was replying at first to the way that I tend, my informational management. So this topic finds its relevance in the discussion as Aquinas is thought of highly by those who hold to Roman Catholicism. The Catholic Answers Encyclopedia called Thomas Aquinas a saint, a philosopher, theologian, doctor of the church, Angelicus Doctor, patron of Catholic universities, colleges, and schools.
I'm actually not that way. I remember stuff. I'll give you an example. Morey on the God Morey Life program mentioned that Thomas Aquinas was a heretic, and I remember the Latin words he used. Thomas Aquinas was hereticus kai antichristus, that he is an antichrist heretic. Mm-hmm. And that he was into all Greek philosophy, and that he got it from the Muslims, and the Muslims got it from Aristotle, and blah, 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 blah. Okay. But then there was one show where he mentioned Thomas Aquinas, and he said, but then he repented at the end of his life, and he came to Christ, or something like that. But it was the only time he made that one comment. But then many other times when we talk about Thomas Aquinas and call him a heretic and stuff like that. And the thing is, for me, I have some significant, strong disagreements with Thomas Aquinas. But I also try to understand Thomas Aquinas, to my knowledge, didn't know Hebrew, he didn't know Greek, he didn't know anything about the Hebrew culture or Second Temple Judaism that was uncovered after the Renaissance. What would Thomas Aquinas have believed had he had access to all this information is a big question. And then you have people it was so easy to condemn Thomas Aquinas. It just the condemnation just falls so easily from their tongue. But then you have Reformed scholars such as R.C. Sproul, and he's not alone. Ken Samples, who are Calvinists, who had great respect for Thomas Aquinas. You remember in covenant theology we talk about the tripartite distinction of the law: moral, civil, and ceremonial.
Yes, with the Westminster distinction, yes.
Right, they got it from Aquinas.
That's cool.
Right, and now, of course, Morey rejected that, but I mean, that's part of the system. There's a Reformed scholar who is actually Van Til, and he was a student of Van Til. His name is K. Scott Oliphant, and he wrote a book called Philosophy in the Service of Apologetics, or I can't remember what it was. I think it was Apologetics, Philosophy in the Service of Religion, or something like that. But it was written by K. Scott Oliphant, and then he has a chapter on Thomas Aquinas, in which he says, a lot of Calvinists are actually reconsidering some of what Aquinas said, that he wasn't as far up. So, is it possible that Thomas Aquinas would go to hell? It's possible. I just don't know. Because I'm trying to be respectful to someone who didn't know what I know today. But when I hear Morey make these kinds of comments, and then he kind of says, oh, but he repented, and then it's one of those things where it's just kind of like, huh?
The next segment was fueled by someone's very untoward behavior to me on Facebook. But he happens to be a Bible-believing Christian as well, and someone who worked with me in ministry before. Johnny and I got to talking about church attendance and how that might play into that problem and problems like that. The segment starts with me talking about some church attendance issues with people at the time I was involved with 3rd Street Ministry in Santa Monica. This doesn't really seem relevant to the main topic, but seems relevant to the current trends of people being very wild or very cold like Dan has been on social media. And granted, that's not really what Johnny had in mind when he was talking on the clip here, but I'm going to play it anyway right now.
Anyway, like a lot of the people that were attending or going up to listen to the apologetics talks out there and unbeliever versus believer arguing and stuff, they weren't churchgoers. Like there's one particular fan that kept going out to listen to Lewis, who was a devoted fan who was there every single time, but he considered that as like his church. And so Chris of 5 Point Baptist was confronting him on it and trying to get him to see that that's not the same thing as church. You'd have to really like go to a church and stuff in order to consider like in Christ, so to speak. To the extent that that's adding on to salvation is a different talk. I think like the heated arguments make people see it that way, because when you get down to the bare bones, what is required for salvation is only by grace or just faith, which is by grace. And they get into baptism arguments. Oh, the baptism is going to require it. No. Well, then how is church going a requirement too? Well, like you said, it's part of your sanctification. And so,
yes, the thing is, when people start asking the question, do I need to go to church in order to be saved? We say, no. Okay, well then what's the problem? The problem is that we're getting our theology wrong. Okay, the theology is that when a person becomes born again, and we're speaking reform now, okay? If a person becomes born again, God makes them a new creation. God gives them faith. God gives them repentance, and they go through the process of sanctification. Yes, they stumble. Yes, they fall. But the Holy Spirit keeps getting them back up. Yes, they will go through dry spells. But this is what sanctification is all about. But how do you become sanctified? This is after justification. This is post-salvation, okay? In sanctification, where you're stumbling and you're falling, you have to go to the means of grace. And the means of grace are, number one, prayer. Number two, the Word. Or it should be the Word first and then prayer. But you also go to a church. And that's where you get baptized. That's where you hear the sermons. That's where you get Sunday school. That's where you get access to the sacraments in the church. And so, do you need to go to church in order to get saved? No, you don't need to go to church to get saved. But when you get saved, you go to the means of grace to cultivate that sanctification. So baptism, the Lord's Supper, what's it called? The church attendance. That's where you get the means of grace. And so that's the real issue. So you do it for sanctification, not for salvation.
Yeah, it's essentially like saying, why walk in Christ if you're not walking in Christ? What's the point of walking in Christ if you're not walking in Christ?
I'm pretty sure Johnny's not overlooking the doctrine of justification there as the step in salvation where, by faith, the believer is declared judicially righteous by God. He's only stating the means of grace as that used by God to confirm or ratify a covenant between himself and Christian believers, who are elect and or saved. I've come to think that Dan is so bad to me that he has no problem turning on me and vowing others to silence upon threat of eternal damnation. I wondered, is that even possible to do? Could someone do that and send others to hell? Is it possible that Catholic dogma led Dan in that direction of thinking?
Well, if he's a Roman Catholic, you have to understand that he has a different gospel. Now, I don't know exactly how well he knows his faith, and I don't know that Roman Catholics, if they do, I'm not aware of it, but I don't know that Roman Catholics actually speak this way. I don't remember Paul Keating or Tim Staples or any of these guys on Catholic Gospel saying that if you're talking to someone and you make a vow not to talk to them again, and you do the next day, you're going to terminate your justification and blah, 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 mortal sin or something like that. I've never heard any of these people talk this way, so this would be a very strange thing to me anyway.
I'm left to conclude there are no specific answers forthcoming yet, and there's nothing I can rationally derive or conclude about what happened to Dan in life. But whatever is going on could have to do in part with the many things that I talked about, or that were talked about in the show today, i.e. the Roman Catholicism, Catholic biases, and certain trends in society. What if there are societal problems at large, fueled by the advent and existence of social media and these more cultural problems and trends are contributing to Dan's negligence as a friend. Due to problems that have been going on lately among the brethren, I've realized that maybe the problem is not coming from the sheep of God specifically. Maybe certain functions and features of social media, Facebook in particular, have infected society with nastiness, ill will, and skewed notions of behavioral expectation through these mediums of communication we call social media. I asked several of my friends what they thought about the widespread influence of society long-term due to the advent of social media. First, I was talking with my buddy Mark of our music group Sahala Hala about smartphones.
Phones are having a detrimental effect on people in a number of ways. Starting with the Wi-Fi itself, if you're using the Wi-Fi. The electromagnetic energies are affecting the brain in various ways. Two, people are not using their own minds as much as computers, depending as a crutch on the device to a great extent. So they're not exercising fully their own minds. The brain has a tremendous capacity for a lot of things. Third, because people are spending so much time staring at phones, they're not looking around at the environment, nature, and even possibly messaging coming from nature, or through nature from the Godhead. Ancient people and indigenous people were always on top of that. They were looking around, they were seeing things in nature. They were seeing God, emanations of God coming through nature. They were seeing the immanence of God or the gods in nature itself. And great attention to that.
To interject again, Marx's talk about gods, plural, is obviously in reference to the religions of indigenous cultures here. While he tends to be highly inclusive and relativist, meaning he pretty much buys into it freely himself, I do not. Besides, said worldview is self-refuting for said gods not existing.
And that really was the case, up till, in the world in general, probably up until about 1800, or maybe up until about the 1700s, perhaps. At that point, people tended to fall back more on the left brain, the rational side. It's funny you mentioned bicameral government, because Philip K. Dick was writing about the bicameral mind instinct.
Next, Mark and I were chatting about the advent of blocking and it contributing to societal ills.
I mean, if I know I can block someone on Facebook, then in the real world, when I deal with people, I'd be more machine-like quality in dealings. I think, I'm not talking to this person. No. It creates walls of separation, or it creates a false sense of security. I don't know what you think about it. I mean, that's just the way I see it. I don't know what you think about that. You probably don't use Facebook.
It's like a lot of innovations, technological or otherwise. They start off, the people who make them start off with pretty good intentions, and the thing itself is usually pretty good. And then it becomes abused, it becomes addictive, it becomes corrupting. Or the people involved with the use of it become corrupted. It's like a lot of things. I mean, you could say the same thing about automobiles. When automobiles started out, here's a really cool thing. Gas was cheap. Now, we didn't have global warming at that point. Here's a way people can have autonomy in terms of how they travel around and move around. There weren't so many freeways. There were a lot of two-lane roads. The cars only went 30 miles an hour, and that was probably very fast. And so it started off great. It was okay. People could get places they never could before faster. It's great. And now we're really with that. You can say that about just about every major technological advance.
Also, I chatted with Johnny about social media, and here's the clip.
I'm always been sort of iffy about Facebook. It's just. I came back to it to find all the friends, only to find that I had the same friends that I thought I had. My older friends are not really that good to me anyway. But I think it's not culture, but it's just a huge level of infecting things. We don't see the consequences of it.
Anyway, are you saying that the blocking feature of Facebook is a bad thing, or?
I think it's too easy to do, but it's just we also have overpopulation cities and stuff that along similar lines to where people are more uptight with their dealings, and women are more concerned for safety, against rape and stuff. I sound kind of like a troglodyte thing, but
the way I see it is that the way I see it is that Facebook is a less personal way of communicating with people that are far away. Not that people that are close to each other geographically can't communicate on Facebook also, but I think Facebook has allowed people to meet people, across the Atlantic, and you can talk to someone in Asia or in the Middle East in a matter of seconds. You can video chat and stuff like that, but it's less personal. Unless you're someone that just puts all your information, your home address, where you work, or your phone number, then in a way it's even more personal. But then you have other social media, Snapchat, Instagram. Of course, no one goes on MySpace anymore. So you have Twitter, of course, and there are different levels of how close you are. But whereas prior to the advent of the internet, having someone's phone number was like, you have so-and-so's phone number. So I think it's very different categorically because it was not as simple. You couldn't just, get someone's phone number unless you pulled up the phone book and knew what their name was.
Yeah.
So it's slightly different, but now with the way we're all connected through networks, has changed the level. In other words, me and you having each other's phone numbers in 1985. I know you and I didn't know each other back then, but hypothetically we did.
Yeah.
If you and I in 1985 having each other's phone numbers meant something different than today you and I having each other's cell phone, because cell phones are just kind of more universal. Everybody has them. And back then if the phone rang, everybody was like, oh, where's your phone? I don't even know if we had answering machines in 85. And if they did, there was very few people that had them. So it's just the dynamic of how phones are perceived. In fact, I think that most people, when they have a smartphone, probably 10% of the phone use is actually to talk on the phone. It's mostly to go online. I use it mostly to watch YouTube videos, go on social media, or read books. So, go on the internet and stuff like that. And sometimes people will actually ignore a phone call because they're too busy doing something else on the phone. So I think it's slightly different. I don't think it's the exact same thing. But also it has the dramatic change has made it possible for stalkers to be cyber stalking people. In some ways, that's even more dangerous. Bill Burr, the comedian, was actually making a comment about how you have pedophiles who before, they had to go buy themselves a truck and then go and find rich kids to get to rich school and then try to offer them ice cream so that they could move them into the truck or something like that. And now you could just, go up on Google and then find kids and stuff like that. And that's really super unfortunate. And now kids need to be watching more carefully because you don't know what they're exposed to now.
Yeah, that's pretty sick.
We chatted also about surface judging that goes on with social media and how general social media culture may contribute to folkways and norms of judging that way.
My concern has become, since talking with you last, you were mentioning like the death of the author, so the post-structuralism stuff. I really appreciated that answer. My worry is that social media is contributing to like a sort of dumbness or like surface judging or something where people don't have to actually like read the article of something or the book share, and they're only reading the title or the face value of what they see the picture of the article and the title, and they read the comments and they just glaze past it. It's like headline browsing, but at a higher level of like stupidity, for lack of a better word, And it's the same type of approach that post-structuralism tries to confront. Charles Barth.
But it's also, I think, confirmation bias. If you have a specific bias, especially when you have, with journalists today who have the liberal narratives that they're pushing forward, everything they read is read through the narrative that they have, and so they have confirmation bias. And so the death of the author, I think, is basically the postmodern way of saying that I can ignore the original meaning of the author and read and interpret his words in light of my own bias.
So what else do you think is contributing to like the the anti-intellectualism of this era. I don't see a lot of people walking around with books that they're reading. You know, I live in a different city than you, of course.
Well, I'm listening because I watch a lot of TV and I watch movies, so I think I'm somewhat aware of what's going on in the culture. And of course, I listen to shows like, I'll listen to, on YouTube, Michael Heiser has some interesting things about culture, and Michael Brown, James White talks about things like that. And I also listen to some political stuff like Ben Shapiro, Dinesh D'Souza. The thing is that people have a short attention span. Today, when you make a point, you got to make that point in 30 seconds or less, or people tune you out. So that's one problem. The other problem that I see is that people are giving credibility to people that aren't specialists in their particular field. So, for example, if I have a heart problem, I'm not going to go to a medical doctor. I'm going to go to a cardiologist. And so when you look at the modern generation, like the young kids, 12 years old, and they are taking advice about how to live their lives from Cosmo, or reading interviews on Teen Vogue on something that Miley Cyrus may have said or Katy Perry may have said, instead of listening to their pastor or reading their Bible, getting into the Proverbs and stuff like that. They're giving credibility to these celebrities who, many of which live very dysfunctional lives. And these are the people that they give credibility to, not to people that are trained in the things that are spiritual, people that are giving counseling, people that are involved in preaching the word and praying and stuff like that. And so I think it's the attributing of credibility to people that shouldn't have that credibility. Like if I had a crisis of conscience and wanted to know where to move on in my life, I'm not going to go listen to Miley Cyrus or Katy Perry or Lady Gaga. I'm going to go to the Word. I'm going to go talk to pastors. I'm going to, maybe I'll call James White or Michael Brown, or I'll talk to my friends at church, people that I know have some wisdom. I'm not going to go read an article in Teen Vogue or Maxim magazine to see what some model says. That's not what I'm going to do. But if you look at the modern generation, they would prefer to watch a movie, a movie that is pushing forward some liberal, transgender, LGBTQ narrative that portrays Christianity as a bunch of racist, sexist, homophobic bigots. They're basically going to the medical doctor for chiropractic things. They're going to a optometrist when they need brain surgery.
I recall that Christ said to not judge according to appearance, but to judge with righteous judgment. That's John 7:24. And that would be good for people to know. As a result of these many conversations about social media and technology, I ended up creating my own social media website from scratch on tribe.so, and it is called Retrobook. The intent there is not just merely to have people share their retro styles and memories and profiles, but to foster a culture there of folkways and norms that run contrary to the current seeming trends of nastiness on social media. So I meant retro in that capacity. Everyone can access the site, sign up, and create their own profile at the URL address retrobook.tribe.so. All you need is to provide an email and password or log in with an existing Google account. I had hoped that it would be a really fun site for everyone, so go ahead and join, please. It would make my day. Also, my book, The Archer's Wife, is a fictional novel available on Amazon.com. The author listed as David I. Black. You can search it in the search or whatever as The Archer's Wife, David Black. My listeners might be interested because of the discussions in the book between the characters about biblical Hebrew. That component was intended to be very helpful and informative, but not dogmatic by any means. Price is $5.99 on Kindle, $16.95 in paperback. I also have the book A Dragon Comes as well, the memoir mentioned in this podcast episode, which is also available on Amazon as two separate paperback books, part 1 and part 2. You might want to also check out our music groups, the Holla Holla on Spotify or iTunes, and that's the group involving Mark and myself. I'll post examples of the songwriting of Dan to the post of this episode on the website at thedavidblackshow.wordpress.com. Those will be videos of me playing them from my other channel. Everyone, thanks for listening today to The David Black Show on the 9's podcast.